The 2 centuries preceding the Mongol invasions of Eurasia witnessed a golden age for the maritime Silk Road. The reunification of China under the Song dynasty once again put the geopolitical heartbeat of the world system back in its place. The Cholas of Tamilakam created a powerful navy that protected shipping lanes to Southeast Asia, and the trade-friendly Fatimid Caliphate rose to become the dominant naval power of the Arab world. Naturally, Persian traders benefited from this unprecedented period of commercialization and globalization. But the slightest of neglect towards land routes may very well have costed the Persians their political independence for the next few centuries. That process started not with the demise of the Buyid Iranian Empire, but rather its linguistic cousin, the Samanids. Staunch promoters of Persian culture, the Samanids ruled a realm spanning Khorasan and Transoxiana, where the cities of Bokhara, Samarkand, Merv, and Nishapur thrived off the Silk Road trade. The wealth of Bokhara was said to be comparable to Baghdad, traditionally considered the greatest Islamic city. Another name for Transoxiana was Turan, which today has Turkic connotations, but historically belonged to Iranian dynasties. It wasn't until the Aylukhanids invaded that Turan became Turkicized, and even afterwards the Persian language stayed as the lingua franca of the Silk Road up until the Russian conquests. There's no denying, however, that the destruction of Samanid power in Turan marked the start of Oghuz Turkic domination in Iran. Acting in accordance with the Aylukhanids, Ghaznavid Turks of Oghuz Mamluk origin wrested control of Samanid Khorasan, allowing the Seljuk Turks to assert their independence. It was a grave mistake for both empires, because only a few decades later, the Western Aylukhanids found themselves to be vassals of the Seljuks, while the Ghaznavids lost control of Khorasan. The Seljuks then swept down the Iranian plateau with unstoppable momentum, ended Buyid power, and re-established Abbasid Iraq as a political entity. Iran, on the other hand, stayed a part of the Great Seljuk Empire, or so it says on paper. Realistically, the prospect of effective Turkic and later Mongol rule in Iran was always marred by general division, which may or may not be explained by the nomadic steppe tradition of dividing land between heirs. For the Seljuks' case, land was not exclusively assigned to members of the original Seljuk dynasty. Locals or Turkmen of other tribes had their share of governance in the Seljuk world. For the context of the wider Indian Ocean world, the most relevant of these governors were the Salgurids, who gained power in the original Persian homeland of Fars in the early 12th century and controlled most of Seljuk Iran's coastline, including the major port of Saraf. Therefore, it can be safe to assume the Salgurids managed the bulk of Persian trade along the maritime routes. Especially as central Seljuk authorities splintered and local rulers acted ever more independently. Salgurid Persia continued to prosper after their Seljuk overlords collapsed, and they survived by paying tribute to first the Khwarezmids and then the Mongols, until the Ilkhanate finally ridded them of their positions in the late 13th century. During the preceding 2 centuries of Salgurid rule, major developments occurred elsewhere in the Indian Ocean regarding new foreign powers or other Persian-speaking dynasties. Firstly, the Song dynasty of China shifted towards a more mercantile, maritime foreign policy in the early 12th century, and Chinese merchants quickly renewed competition with Persian, Arab, Tamil, and later Gujarati ones in Southeast Asia and South India. Secondly, the late 12th century also witnessed the absorption of northern India into the Persian fold not by sea, but mainly by land. Iranic Ghurids finished what their Persian-speaking Ghaznavid predecessors had started in the previous century, by advancing deep into the Gangetic plain all the way to western Bengal. Consolidation of Ghurid rule in northern India proved impossible, however, because encroachment by Khwarezmian Turks and Mongol invaders soon wiped out Persian-speaking Ghur. But Ghurid holdings in India would not meet the same fate. Instead, the bizarre Indo-Persian Turkic rump state eventually morphed into the Delhi Sultanate, the beginning of Muslim India, and the integration of India into the Persianate world. A process achieved first by fending off a century of Mongol invasions, welcoming thousands of Iranian refugees and then subjecting the rest of India to their own invasions in the early 13th century. In other words, here begins a pattern of Persian-speaking Muslim dynasties in India that would continue to the eve of British conquest. Even the commonly used name for modern India, Hindustan, is of Persian origin, a name originally applied to denote both the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire. Furthermore, nearly 6 centuries of Persian influence in India resulted in the 2 dominant lingua francas of the subcontinent, Hindi and Urdu, both borrowing heavily from the Persian vocabulary. Interestingly, Indian dynasties of Turkic origin also chose to adopt Persian as the administrative language. Yet ironically, the languages of the Turks were becoming more and more normalized in the Persian heartland itself. 2 out of the 4 main Mongol Khanates adopted Persian customs and bureaucracy, and Persians formed a privileged class in the Yuan Empire, but for all intents and purposes. The use of Persian as the native language in Central Asia and Azerbaijan was a notion long gone by the time the Mongols invaded. Persian retained its status as a court language, but commoners favored local Azeri or Chagatai Turkic vernacular. After Mongol rule collapse in Iran, Turkic invasions resumed and culminated with the plight of Timur, accentuating the linguistic change. At the same time, the Delhi Sultanate suffered a serious reversal of fortune, losing all territory in eastern, southern, and central India. However, the original Ghaznavid goal to bring Islam into the heart of India was now more than fulfilled. For a century of Muslim invasions now left the subcontinent a patchwork of both Hindu and Muslim kingdoms. Arguably the most powerful of them all was the Bahmani Sultanate, also notable for being the most Persianized Indian state by far. The very name of the Bahmani dynasty was derived from an ancient Sassanid Persian king. And the Bahmanids sponsored immigration from Iran to the Deccan Plateau, where Persians involved themselves with commerce or wielded too much influence over the court. Inevitably, the Persian presence did meet some opposition from local Indian Muslims, known as Deccanis, who were intent on safeguarding their own interests. Having already entrenched themselves with the support of the Bahmanis, however, the political and cultural influence of the Persians persisted, and somehow grew when the Bahmani Sultanate collapsed at the turn of the 16th century. So when Safavid Iran converted from Sunni Islam to Shia, strong Persian influence ensured the same would be reciprocated by many of the post-Bahmanid Deccan sultanates. Chief among them were the sultanates of Ahmadnagar and the Sultanate of Golconda, whose sultans read the khutbah in the name of the Iranian Shah, a sign of submission to Iran. There was one Sunni outlier in the Deccan, that being the Sultanate of Bijapur. Yet Persian culture and commerce was too firmly ingrained there as well, and the sultans declared themselves vassals to Iran in a manner like their neighbors, paying little attention to any religious differences. Believe it or not, the Deccan sultanates are just a few of many examples of Persianate society in early modern India. Both the sultanates of native-ruled Gujarat and Bengal, at opposite ends of the continent, shared the same official language, that being Persian. However, they showed little political devotion to Iran, unlike the Deccanis, not least because their enemies in Hindustan were now controlled by the pro-Persian Mughals. Perhaps the Gujaratis and Bengalis, with their strong seafaring traditions, can be credited more for the Islamization of Southeast Asia. Of course, traders from Persia and Arabia also played a role. But the fact that both Gujarat and Bengal were run by Persianized Muslim Indians meant Southeast Asia experienced some degree of Persianization due to Islamization while maintaining an Indianized society. Henceforth, it was Persian, not Gujarati, or Bengali or Arabic, that became the lingua franca of foreigners in Southeast Asia by the late medieval period. A legacy visible in the number of Persian loanwords to Malay, the dominant language of the Malay archipelago. So if we take a step back, and view things from a global perspective, we'll immediately be reminded of the sheer magnitude of the Persianate world in the medieval and early modern periods, which influenced Swahili in East Africa, Hindustani in India, and Malay in Southeast Asia. Arguably, the very idea of the latter as a distinct geocultural unit owes its existence to Persian traders who coined the earliest name for Southeast Asia, the lands below the winds. This exonym later became accepted as an endonym in the Malay world too, in the 16th century. But, as we all know, the 16th century is also notable for the beginning of European naval domination in the Indian Ocean at the expense of Arab and Persian merchants. Pushed out of the Malay archipelago by Ottoman and Portuguese competition, the Persians redirected their attention northwards to Thailand, where they played a prominent role at court for much of the 17th century. After Japan turned its back on trade in 1637 and the French were expelled in 1688, Safavid Iran was left as the largest non-Far Eastern trading partner of Thailand, as evidenced by frequent diplomatic expeditions between the two countries. Further respite for the Persians occurred earlier in the 17th century, when they captured Hormuz and Bahrain from the Portuguese. That campaign, however, did little to combat the influence of other Europeans in Iran, namely the Dutch, English, Georgians, and Russians. In the 18th century, Iran went into an irreparable decline relative to European powers, in part due to an over-reliance on exports of rugs, silk, and horses to other declining powers like the Mughals and Poland-Lithuania. The trade reached such an extent that Europeans started calling Persian rugs Polish rugs. When competition from Indian silk producers skyrocketed, expansionist Russians started taking an interest in Iran not for its riches, but for its role as a land bridge to wealthier India. Nader Shah, who captured Oman in the mid-18th century, tried to revive Iranian economic and naval power for the last time, but after his death Iran fractured into competing dynasties. These events can be seen as part of a larger trend of decline in the Persianate world, starting in the late medieval period. In East Africa, Arabic replaced Persian as the main foreign language, foreshadowing Omani Arab conquest in the late 17th century. In China, Persian had lost its status as the lingua franca by the time of the Qing dynasty, despite diplomatic contacts between Ming and Timurid or Safavid Iran relating to the porcelain trade. In India, the two main Persianate blocks, that being the Mughals and the Deccan Sultanates, drained each other in a series of grueling guerrilla wars, weakening overall Persianate Muslim in power in the wake of Hindu Maratha expansion. Post-Mughal Indian states like the Nizams of Hyderabad and Bengal did use Persian well into the early 19th century, until the language was rendered defunct by English and Hindustani. And finally, in Central Asia, the revival of Silk Road routes during the 16th and 18th centuries benefited a trading bloc of Iran, Armenia, Russia, and Poland-Lithuania, thus salvaging Persian's official status. But that, too, was ended by Russian settler colonialism starting in the late 19th century. Aside from early antiquity, the Persianate world has never been smaller than today. Thanks for watching.